In the second section of research ethics, I wanted to focus on animal care and welfare. And this is regulated by a committee called the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, or IACUC. And IACUC is a committee at all universities, all research companies, basically anybody that is wanting to do research with animals and wants to publish that research has to have an IACUC committee. And this committee is charged with the responsibility for the proper care and use of laboratory animals in research, testing, teaching, and production. And so you will see an IACUC committee at every single university. We have one here at Chico, which I'll talk more in depth about in just a moment. At any research company like Zoetis or Dow or the agroscience companies, Marielle, any of those companies that are doing research with animals. And so the reason that IACUC needs to be in place is because for any product to get approved for use through the FDA and the USDA, or for any manuscript to be published, you have to have an IACUC approval number, and that has to be verified at a couple of different stages. And so this committee is really, really important because they uphold the values and the regulatory acts for the safety and welfare of lab animals so that they aren't mistreated. So the main governing regulation of that IACUC is charged with upholding is the Animal Welfare Act, which was created first in 1966 by USDA, and then it's gone through several revisions, and the most recent revision is since 2015. In addition to the Animal Welfare Act, we also have to uphold the policies put forth by the Public Health Service for both human care and the use of lab animals. And to uphold both the Animal Welfare Act and the PHS Act, we actually follow the Guide for the Care and Use of Lab Animals, which is reviewed once every 10 years. And so you may hear this called the Ag Guide for short, that focuses on kind of food animal research. And so the Ag Guide is actually in the process of going through a commenting period and will be published in its latest draft in October. And so it's been fun to actually be a part of that process for the first time. And so this is a research endeavor that was put forth by the major food animal industries as well as the major food animal peer-reviewed journals, so like Journal of Animal Science and Journal of Dairy Science. And so I served on the editorial board for that publication this year and have been involved with a little bit of the commenting process too. And so these guides are really how we manage different research projects that come across to our committee, which we'll talk about in just a second. And so we have to actually create reports as a committee at an institution on an annual basis, and that report is submitted to the Office of Laboratory Animal Welfare. So very similarly to the democracy government structure that the U.S. has, the Animal Care and Use Committee goes through several checks and balances. So the institution will check the researcher, then OLA and the animal welfare will check the institution, and it goes in the vice versa way as well. And so let's talk more specifically about the Animal Care and Use Committee here at Chico State. And so the reason that I want you guys to be familiar with this is because we're going to address this, especially with the Animal Science Project as we move forward in this class. And so our committee here at Chico State, of which I'm a member of, is charged with ensuring the compliance of animal welfare policies that we looked at in the previous slide on laboratory animals. And so this is not just food animals like the cattle and the beef cattle and dairy cattle at the farm, or the sheep at the farm, or the swine, but also the mice and the rats that are in the biology department and in the psychology department at the on the Chico State campus. We also regulate fish a lot too, so the salmon lab and the zebra fish lab as well. And so some of the principles that we actually uphold every time we look at a research project and assess it during the application process has the lead researcher considered alternatives to using these animals? Like, is there a different model that can be used that is less invasive? We also assess and critique the experimental design and the performance of the procedures that will be used to collect the data. We determine the appropriate use of the species. We will look at minimization on the lab researcher's part for mitigating animal discomfort, stress, and pain. That one is a really big area that we take very, very seriously. So we want to make sure that animals are not having any unnecessary discomfort, stress, or pain just for the sake of collecting data. We also look at appropriate sedation and surgical procedures, and we make sure that a veterinarian is involved at some point in this process, whether that's the veterinarian on our committee or an outside veterinarian that we utilize at the university farm. We also will look at the provision of appropriate animal transport if animals need to be transported, and animal husbandry techniques as well. So this can be day-to-day care for the animals, so feed, water, grazing pasture, breeding methodology, etc. And then finally, the last principle that we uphold and look at is the experimentation that is under the supervision of a qualified personnel. So the lead researcher or the project director that is carrying out the project has to demonstrate that they have knowledge in this technique and that they can carry it out. And so some of every IACUC committee has to have a certain structure to their committee members. So each committee has to have at least one certified veterinarian. They have to have at least one practicing scientist that has experience in research that involves animals. There has to be at least one member from a non-scientific background, so this can be a member from inside or outside the institution. And there has to be one public member that is not associated with the university or the research institution, but has an interest in the proper care and use of animals. And so our process here at Chico State to get a research project approved by the IACUC committee is, first and foremost, the project director is going to have to fill out an application. And this is a multi-page application that asks about 50 to 60 different questions. And so that application has to show the pertinent information. So where the experiment is taking place, the number of animals that will be used, experimental design, and the procedures. The number of animals being used is something that we look at as an assessment piece really, really carefully. And so we love it when people actually take into consideration statistical power calculations. And so we highly recommend that being used, so that and we're going to get to statistical power calculations in just a few weeks, but I just wanted to make sure to highlight it because it is a part of this IACUC process as well. Once the application is submitted by the project director to the administrator of the committee, it will then be routed through us committee members for review. And so we get emails sometimes 3 and 4 times a week of new applications that are being submitted. And so I individually will go through the application, will look at different areas of the application that I have specialty in. And if I have no questions or concerns, I reply back to the administrator. I approve this for an outside member review, or I approve this project. And so if I do have a question, though, or anybody on the committee has a question, then those comments are summarized and sent back to the project director. And so that process can look a couple of different ways. The project can be unanimously voted down, so they can't submit another project like that again, or it can be revised and resubmitted. And so once the research project has been approved through however many times it takes to get through that process, then proper training will be assigned to the project director and any personnel that will be working on the study. And a lot of that actually looks like computer models that we do for the university, or it could be, laboratory training and laboratory safety as well. And then an IACUC number will be assigned. And so that seems like a really big part of the process, and it absolutely is, but it's not all of the process. And so as long as this project is taking place, so if it's over multiple years, or you're going to be using a research project for multiple years in a class, we have to inspect that facility. So our committee does biannual inspections. So every fall and every spring, we will take a walking tour and inspect each facility where research is taking place. And so during that time, we look at the maintenance of the facilities, if there's any major problems that need to be addressed. We look at records, we look at the health of the animals, etc. And so all of these things then go into an annual report that is written up by our committee chairman and then submitted to OLAW. And so again, it's that whole process of checks and balances. And so my experience with the IACUC process started as a graduate student. And so I had several research projects during my graduate time at New Mexico State where I had to write and submit an application that would be approved through the IACUC process. When I came back to Chico State as a faculty member, because Chico State is highly values teaching, there's minimal research that takes place compared to like a land grant university like UC Davis, but there still is research that takes place. And so one of my first research projects was to look at the digestibility of brewer's grain by cattle. And so we really didn't have any means to do that at the farm at that point in time, but I had been trained in graduate school to do rumen cannulation surgeries, and that's where the rumen actually has a window inserted in it. And this window, or this cannula, is allows direct access to the rumen so that we can take samples out and assess those in the laboratory. So we can look at things like how fast a feedstuff is digested. Does it foster the reproduction of healthy bacteria and fungi? And this is really important as we look at the effectiveness of digestibility of different feedstuff, especially as we are walking into an era of trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so this work becomes really important because we're trying to reduce methane production by cattle. And one of the ways that we can look at that is by having samples that come directly out of the rumen. And so that was our big research question. And so to get this process started, I had to go through the application process with IACUC, and it had to be approved before I could even do the surgery. So once we were approved, we actually had people from the IACUC committee come out and observe because they were interested in it. And myself and a veterinarian, Dr. Mike Carley with Mid Valley Vet in Orland, actually did the procedures. And this really led to a good working relationship with the IACUC committee, to the point that I was nominated to be on the committee a couple of years later, and I remain on the committee for Chico State right now as well, and I really enjoy that work. And so this is just a little bit of my experience with IACUC, and I just wanted to put this in a real hands-on context for you, because this committee is really extremely important to make sure that we are always upholding animal welfare concerns, and so that we have the highest integrity and associated with animal welfare, and specifically pain reduction and discomfort.